Ethan Mallory never should have taken the last train home. He told himself that countless times as the subway doors closed behind him with a hiss that sounded too much like a warning. His friend Clara had begged him earlier in the night not to ride. So late she said she'd heard stories about people disappearing on this line, vanishing without a trace between stations. Ethan laughed it off, the way most people laugh at urban legends. But now, sitting alone in the flickering car, the echo of her words clung to him like a shadow. The station he had left behind was empty. The train he rode was emptier still. And in the window's reflection, just behind his shoulder, someone else was already sitting there. I never liked the subway at night. There was something about those tiled tunnels and echoing platforms that felt less like part of a city and more like the bowels of something alive, something waiting. Still, it was the only way home after late shifts. I remember descending the cracked stairs, each step echoing into emptiness, the sound bouncing back like there were more footsteps than just mine. The walls sweated moisture, damp streaks glistening in the flicker of overhead lights. The air smelled heavy with metal, oil, and a faint trace of mildew that clung to the back of my throat. The platform was deserted when I reached it. The benches were empty, wrappers and scraps of old newspapers scattered across the floor, fluttering faintly in the stale breeze that moved through the tunnel. The silence was immense. Even the distant hum of trains felt muffled, swallowed by the darkness beyond. For a while I stood still, listening, almost expecting to hear someone breathing nearby. My heart picked up when I thought I did, a faint intake of air behind me, but when I turned, there was no one. Just the wide, empty stairwell leading back up into the city. The train arrived with a shriek that was far too loud for the silence that came before it. Its headlights cut into the tunnel gloom like sharp knives, growing brighter until the entire platform glared white. The screech of the brakes rang in my skull, and I flinched at the sound. When the doors slid open, the interior seemed darker than it should have been, like the light inside had grown weaker with time. I stepped in anyway, because what else could I do? I needed to get home. The doors shut behind me, and with a lurch, the train carried me away from the empty platform. I sat down near the middle of the car, my bag clutched in my lap, my ears filled with the constant humming of the engine beneath my feet. The overhead lights buzzed, the steady drone oddly comforting at first. But then I noticed how long the car seemed. The rows of empty seats stretched back far further than I remembered them ever being. Each one vacant, each one waiting. It was like stepping into a corridor that had no end. I looked out the window to distract myself, watching the tunnel walls blur past, but soon I caught something that made my skin prickle. The reflection staring back at me was not right. At first I thought it was just me, tired and hollow-eyed after a long day, but then I noticed movement. Behind my shoulder, in the reflection, there was someone sitting 3 rows back, a shadow in the glass, a shape that looked human but indistinct, as though the face had been smudged with a hand. My pulse quickened, and I turned my head sharply to look. The seats were empty, every single one. The car stretched out in its hollow stillness, nothing but me in it. I laughed nervously, a sound too loud in the quiet space, and whispered under my breath that I was imagining things. Lack of sleep, that had to be it. But when I faced the window again, my smile faltered. The figure was still there. Closer this time, 2 rows behind instead of 3. Its head tilted in a way that made my stomach knot, as though it was curious, as though it was studying me. I sat frozen, afraid to look back again. My hands gripped the edge of the seat so hard my knuckles burned white. The hum of the engine grew louder, like the train was straining to move, like something heavier than me was pressing down inside the car. I forced myself to breathe evenly, though each breath came short and sharp. I told myself again that it was nothing, just tricks of the glass, tricks of light. But deep down I knew that reflections don't move closer unless something is really there. The overhead lights flickered suddenly, the glow sputtering until the car plunged into momentary darkness. And in that darkness I felt something shift behind me, the faint scrape of a shoe against the floor. The lights came back with a buzz and a hum, steady once more, illuminating empty rows of seats stretching far into the distance. I almost relaxed until I saw the window again. My reflection looked normal, but the figure was gone. And yet, when I leaned forward, squinting into the glass, I realized it wasn't gone at all. It was right behind me now, so close that I could see the blurred outline of its head hovering just above my own. I tried not to breathe too loudly, terrified that whatever hovered behind me would hear. My body stiffened, my muscles locked in place, as if moving would invite it closer. The reflection in the glass showed its blurred head leaning over mine, featureless, almost melting into the background, but unmistakably there. I wanted to whip around, to prove to myself that nothing was really there, but the thought of seeing it face to face made my chest tighten with panic. Instead, I kept my eyes glued to the window, heart pounding against my ribs in painful thuds. The train slowed abruptly, jerking me forward. The screech of metal against metal made my teeth ache. The doors slid open, but when I glanced outside, there was no platform, only endless tunnel walls, slick with dampness, streaked with grime. The train had stopped in the middle of nowhere. For a moment, The lights dimmed, and in that gloom I swore I saw movement on the tunnel walls, shadows crawling like insects, thousands of them writhing in silence. The doors shut again, the train shuddered violently, and then it continued forward, faster than before. I told myself to calm down, to breathe, to think rationally. Maybe the system glitched, maybe the driver stopped between stations, but deep inside, something gnawed at me. I had been riding this line for years, and I had never once seen the train stop like that. I glanced at the small screen overhead, expecting it to list the next station name, but the letters twisted and flickered, garbled symbols crawling across the display like static. None of it made sense. I forced myself to look back into the car. Empty. Row after row of seats stretched out, untouched. I whispered in my head that I was alone. That had to be true. But then, as my gaze lingered, I noticed something different. The windows on the opposite side of the car were smudged, streaked with marks that hadn't been there before. Handprints, dozens of them. Some large, some small, each one pressed into the glass as if people had clawed at the windows, desperate to get out. The sight made my skin crawl. I rose shakily from my seat and walked toward the nearest set of handprints. The closer I got, the clearer they became, smeared in long, frantic streaks down toward the floor. They looked wet, glistening faintly in the dim light, though I dared not touch them to find out with what. As I stood there staring, another sound rose above the hum of the engine. A faint tapping. It came from the glass itself, rhythmic, deliberate, like someone knocking lightly from the other side. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, blood rushing in my ears, my whole body trembling. My eyes darted to the reflection again, and this time the blurred figure was gone. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been, because I knew then that whatever it was had moved. I felt it before I saw Ethan, icy breath brushing the back of my neck, raising the hairs along my skin. My stomach twisted violently and I almost bolted, but the fear of running, the fear of giving it a reason to chase me, kept me glued to the spot. The train jolted again, throwing me forward. One of the overhead bulbs exploded with a deafening pop, showering the aisle with sparks. For a few seconds, the car was cloaked in darkness, broken only by the strobe of the remaining lights as they flickered desperately. In each brief flash, the car looked different. The seats weren't empty anymore. Figures sat in them, slouched and motionless, their blurred heads tilted at unnatural angles. Their arms hung loosely at their sides, as though their bodies had been drained of all strength. The light steadied. The car was empty again. My chest heaved, my throat dry, as I stumbled backward to my seat, clutching the pole beside me. I didn't know what was real anymore, if any of this was. I tried to convince myself I was losing my mind, that exhaustion was warping my vision, but the smell of smoke from the shattered bulb, and the sting of glass dust in my nose told me this was no dream. I forced myself to sit down, staring straight ahead, refusing to look out the windows, refusing to risk catching another glimpse of the impossible. But the overhead screen flickered again, its broken letters rearranging themselves. For the first time, they formed words I could read. It said my name. I sat frozen, staring at the glowing letters spelling my name on the overhead screen. The way they flickered, as though the train itself was whispering directly to me. I tried to tell myself it was just another malfunction, a glitch like the garbled symbols I had seen before. But deep down, I knew it wasn't random, it was deliberate. Something in this car, or in the train itself, knew who I was. I tried to look away, but my eyes kept being drawn back to the screen, hypnotized by the glow of those letters. Eventually I forced myself to focus on the floor, trying to steady my breathing, counting each inhale, each exhale. The hum of the train had grown louder, vibrating through my feet, into my bones, until I felt it in my chest like a second heartbeat. Then, slowly, I dared to raise my head and look at the reflection in the window again. My heart dropped instantly. My reflection was still there, but it wasn't me anymore. It had changed. The shape in the glass had my body, my posture, but its face was wrong. Its lips were stretched into a grin so wide it looked painful, teeth jagged and sharp where mine were normal. Its eyes glowed faintly, pale pinpricks in the dark, and worst of all, it was moving when I wasn't. I pressed my hands flat against my knees to prove to myself that I was still. But in the glass, the reflection tilted its head to the side, the grin widening as though it was mocking me. I wanted to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat, nothing but a dry rasp escaping. The lights overhead flickered, then began to strobe. In each flash, the seats around me seemed filled again. Dozens of figures sat there, identical to me, copies lined up row after row, all grinning that same jagged grin. Their heads twitched in unison with every flicker of light, jerking back and forth like marionettes with broken strings. I stumbled to my feet, panic clawing through me, and began moving down the aisle. The sound of my footsteps echoed too loudly, as if the car had grown cavernous, stretching into infinity. I gripped the cold steel poles to steady myself, forcing one foot in front of the other. I didn't want to look, but the reflection in the windows followed me, every duplicate turning their heads in perfect sync, their glowing eyes tracking me no matter where I moved. I reached the far end of the car and pressed my face against the connecting door-esque glass. hoping for escape. On the other side was only blackness, no lights at all. The kind of darkness that felt alive, waiting to swallow anyone foolish enough to step inside. I tried the handle anyway, but it didn't move, locked tight. I turned back toward the car, and my blood turned to ice. The seats weren't empty anymore. The copies of me weren't just reflections now. They were there, solid and real, filling every seat, row after row. Dozens of them, maybe more than dozens, each one twitching slightly, heads jerking at unnatural angles, fingers tapping against the metal poles in rhythmic patterns that scraped against my sanity. I stumbled backward until my spine pressed against the locked door. My eyes darted from one copy to another, searching for some sign of life, something to make sense of what I was seeing. But they weren't alive, not in the way I was. Their chests didn't rise and fall with breath, their eyes didn't blink, they just stared, all of them fixed on me with those glowing, inhuman eyes. The hum of the train deepened into a growl, vibrating so strongly that the floor shook beneath my feet. My teeth rattled in my skull, and I clutched the door handle for balance. The duplicates began to rise, their movements stiff, synchronized, like puppets being pulled upward by invisible strings. One by one, they turned their heads toward me, the sound of vertebrae cracking echoing in the silence. And then, from the very back of the car, one of them started walking forward. Its grin stretched wider than the others, splitting its face almost in half. The sound of its footsteps was wet, sticky, as if it were tracking something dark and heavy across the floor. With every step it left faint stains that smeared across the metal, too dark to be water, too thick to be oil. I pressed harder against the locked door, praying it would open, my breath ragged and shallow. The figure moved closer, its head jerking with each step, the others still watching from their seats, motionless. I couldn't tell if it was coming to join me or replace me. By the time it reached the halfway point of the car, I realized I couldn't hear the hum of the train anymore. I couldn't hear anything at all. The silence pressed in like a suffocating weight, and in that silence, I finally heard something else. The sound of my own voice, whispering softly, repeating the same words over and over again. Let me out. The sound of my own voice echoing where I hadn't spoken filled me with a terror that routed me in place. It wasn't just a whisper, it was layered, distorted, as if dozens of throats were repeating the same plea in unison, each one mimicking me. The duplicates in the seats sat frozen, their heads cocked to the side, listening to the phantom voice that sounded like me but didn't come from me. The figure in the aisle kept moving forward, closer with every step, its wet footprints streaking across the car floor, in thick lines that glistened under the buzzing lights. I clawed at the locked connecting door behind me, my fingers slipping against the metal handle slick with sweat. No matter how hard I pulled, it wouldn't budge. My chest heaved, every breath coming out jagged, shallow, panicked. The train rumbled violently beneath my feet, the vibration rattling through the poles, through the glass, through my bones. It felt like the car was alive, quaking with excitement at my fear. The figure was only a few rows away now. Its grin stretched impossibly wide, tearing into the blurred shape of its face until I saw teeth where no teeth should be. The sound of my own voice grew louder, circling the car, bouncing from wall to wall. No longer a whisper but a chant. Let me out, let me out, let me out. I dropped to my knees, trying to cover my ears, but the voice was inside me. It pressed against my skull, vibrating inside my head like a swarm of bees. I could feel my lips moving even though I wasn't speaking, mouthing the same words in sync with the phantom voice. When I dared to look up again, I saw that the other duplicates had risen from their seats. All of them. Their movements were stiff, jerking, unnatural, yet perfectly synchronized. They turned their heads toward me in unison, glowing eyes locked onto me. The chanting grew deafening, and it felt as though every copy of me was forcing their words into my brain, demanding that I give in. The approaching figure was nearly at arm's length when, suddenly, the train screeched. The noise was like knives against glass, shrill enough to rattle my teeth. The car jolted violently, throwing me sideways onto the floor. For a brief moment, everything went dark. When the lights flickered back on, the duplicates had all returned to their seats, sitting perfectly still as if nothing had happened. Their grins were gone, their heads bowed slightly forward, like lifeless dolls arranged in rows. Only one figure remained standing, directly in front of me, close enough that I could see every horrifying detail. It was wearing my clothes, my jacket, my shoes, my bag slung over its shoulder. And this time its face wasn't blurred. It was my face, identical in every way except for the eyes, which glowed faintly like pale fire. I scrambled backward on the floor, kicking at the air, my hands sliding against the vibrating metal beneath me. My double tilted its head, studying me the way I might study an insect crawling across a table. The train rattled harder, as though it, too, was watching, waiting for what would happen next. The duplicates in the seats slowly lifted their heads in unison. One by one their faces sharpened, features forming until each one looked exactly like me. Row after row of my own face staring back at me, each expression blank and empty except for the faint glow of those unnatural eyes. The overhead lights dimmed again, plunging the car into a suffocating twilight. My double leaned closer, and I caught a whiff of something foul, like rust mixed with rot. Its lips stretched into a faint smile, but its voice, my own voice, spoke inside my head, a single word vibrating through me like a command. Trade. The lights cut out completely, and for a moment I was lost in absolute blackness. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, and I flailed blindly, desperate to push the thing away. When the lights flickered back on, the aisle was empty. The duplicates sat still once more, their heads bowed. The floor was clean. No wet footprints, no stains. For a heartbeat, I let myself believe it was gone, that it had all been some hallucination, a nightmare brought on by exhaustion and fear. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to calm myself, trying to breathe. Then, slowly, I lowered my hands and looked at the window beside me. The reflection staring back wasn't moving the way I was. The reflection in the window smiled even though my face was frozen in terror. My chest heaved, but the glass showed me calm, grinning, eyes glowing faintly as if something inside them was alive. I backed away from the window, my legs trembling so badly I nearly stumbled into the seat behind me. I wanted to scream, to pound on the door, to beg for help from anyone at all, but the words wouldn't leave my throat. The train's low hum drowned out everything, vibrating endlessly, reminding me there was no one to hear me anyway. The car lurched, slowing for the first time in what felt like forever. The screeching of the brakes was a banshee scream, echoing through the metal walls until I thought my ears would split. The lights overhead flickered in time with the grinding wheels, plunging the car in and out of darkness. When the train finally shuddered to a halt, the silence afterward was worse than the noise. I looked toward the doors, expecting to see the familiar tiled platform of a station, the safety of a place I recognized. But when the doors slid open, there was no platform at all. Instead, there was only a vast cavern, black rock dripping with water, the ceiling lost in shadow. The air that rushed in carried the stench of rot and something deeper, like soil that had never known light. The smell wrapped around me, sinking into my lungs until it was all I could taste. The door stayed open, waiting. The car behind me was filled again, dozens of me, silent and still, each one watching without blinking. They didn't move, but I felt their stares push me toward the open doorway, their glowing eyes burning into my back. I tried to resist, clinging to the pole, but my own arms felt heavy, sluggish, as though the strength had been drained from them. My legs trembled, and I took one hesitant step forward, then another, pulled by something I couldn't fight. And then I saw it. Standing just beyond the threshold of the train, waiting in the cavern's shadows, was my double. Not the blurred, broken figure from before, but a perfect copy of me. Its clothes were spotless, its stance confident, its face calm. It raised one hand slowly, gesturing for me to follow, as if this had been planned from the beginning. I shook my head violently, pressing myself against the pole, whispering that I wouldn't go, that I couldn't, but the car behind me stirred. Every duplicate lifted its head at once, the sound of their necks snapping into place like cracking branches. They didn't speak, but the words filled my head anyway. The chant returning stronger than before, "Let me out, let me out, let me out." My double extended its hand toward me, palm open, waiting. The chanting grew louder, deafening, until I couldn't think. My body betrayed me, moving without my command. I stumbled to the door, my fingers twitching as though eager to reach out. When I crossed the threshold, the air changed. The train door slammed shut behind me with a final hiss, and the sound of the engine roared as it carried the car away, vanishing back into the tunnel without me. I turned to face the cavern, the silence pressing in on all sides. At first I thought it was empty, but then pairs of eyes began to open in the dark. Dozens, then hundreds, glowing faintly in clusters, blinking in unison. They watched me without moving, unblinking, patient. My double stood at the front of them, smiling faintly. For the first time, it spoke aloud, though its lips didn't move. The voice was mine, echoing in my skull, but deeper, endless. "You were never the original." The words hollowed me out, struck something inside me that made me stumble backward. My breath caught, and I turned to the tunnel where the train had vanished, hoping it might return, hoping this wasn't final. In the distance, I saw a light approaching, the glow of another train coming through the black. For a moment, I felt hope, but as it drew closer I realized the lights weren't headlights. They were rows of gaping mouths, stretching open in unison, filled with teeth too sharp, too many, glowing as they grinned. The screech of its arrival echoed through the cavern like laughter, rattling the stone walls until droplets of water fell like rain. And then the eyes in the dark began to move, drawing closer to me, surrounding me, waiting for me to take my place among them.